This 1867 photograph of two brothers seems peaceful until you see the rope behind their feet. The image looked unremarkable when it first came across the scanner. Two teenage boys in their Sunday best, standing shoulder to shoulder in someone's front yard, squinting into afternoon light. It was donated to the collection along with 40 other loose prints from an estate sale, most of them the usual suspects, posed families, stern grandparents, babies in christening gowns. But this one would not let go. Dr. Marion Ellis had been cataloging photographs at the Alabama Historical Archive for 11 years. She had seen thousands of images from the Reconstruction period, most of them staged and stiff, the subjects trying to project respectability in a world that had just been turned inside out. This photo looked like all the others at first. Two boys, maybe 15 or 16 years old. One white, one black. Both dressed carefully, shirts buttoned to the throat, trousers pressed, boots polished. They were not quite touching, but standing close enough that their shoulders almost brushed. Their expressions were serious, focused, the way people looked when holding still for a camera that required patience. Marion enlarged the scan on her monitor, adjusting the contrast. That was when she noticed the grass behind them, a thin line, darker than the rest. She zoomed in further. It was not a stick or a garden tool, it was rope. Frayed hemp, maybe 3 feet visible, lying in a loose curve behind their boots. One end disappeared under the white boy's heel, the other curled into what looked like a working knot, the kind you would use to secure something, or someone. She sat back from the screen. The boys were not looking at each other. They were both staring directly into the lens, as if they needed whoever saw this picture to understand something. The rope was not accidental. It was too deliberately placed, too visible once you knew to look for it. This was not just a portrait of two friends. Something here was wrong. Marion had grown up in Montgomery, the daughter of a Baptist minister and a schoolteacher who kept a filing cabinet full of clippings about Jim Crow laws and civil rights battles. She had learned early that Southern history was full of things people chose not to see. Photographs, especially the genteel kind from the 1860s and 1870s, were often exercises in controlled narrative. They showed what families wanted remembered: prosperity, lineage, order. They rarely showed what kept that order in place. She pulled the print from its archival sleeve and examined the back. The paper was thick, the kind used by better studios. In faded ink, someone had written two names, Thomas Hendricks and Samuel. No last name for Samuel, which told her something right away. Below the names was a date, June 1867. In the lower corner, stamped in purple, was the mark of a photographer she recognized, J.L. Whitmore, itinerant portraiture, Selma and surrounding counties. Whitmore had worked the Black Belt region in the years right after the war, traveling from plantation to plantation, town to town, taking pictures of families who suddenly had the means and the desire to document themselves as free people, as landowners, as citizens. Marion made notes in her catalog file. The boys looked close in age, and the handwriting on the back suggested a relationship. Brothers, maybe, though the racial difference complicated that in 1867 Alabama. Or a white boy and an enslaved child who had grown up together, now trying to redefine what they were to each other in a world where the legal categories had shifted but the social ones had not. Either way, someone had cared enough to write their names to pay for a formal portrait. That suggested intimacy, or at least acknowledgement. But the rope, that kept pulling her attention back. She held the print under a magnifying lamp. The knot was tight and deliberate, the kind of knot you learned for a purpose. It was not decorative, it was functional, and it was placed exactly where both boys could see it, where it would be visible to anyone who looked closely at the image, but easy to miss if you were just glancing through a box of old pictures. That felt intentional. That felt like evidence. Marion spent the rest of that afternoon chasing the obvious leads. She searched the archive's internal database for other photographs by J.L. Whitmore, cross-referencing with the 1867 timeline. She found 12 more portraits from that summer, all taken in Wilcox and Dallas counties, all of them conventional family groupings. None of them included a rope. She pulled the Selma City Directory from 1866 and 1868. Whitmore had advertised an address on Broad Street above a dry goods store. His rates were listed: 50 cents for a carte de visite, $1 for a cabinet card. She made a note. That was not cheap for 1867, especially in the rural counties. Whoever commissioned this photograph had paid real money for it. Next, she turned to the names. Thomas Hendricks was common enough, but with the Selma connection she narrowed it down. The 1870 census listed a Thomas L. Hendricks, white male, age 19, living in Dallas County with his parents. His father, Amos Hendricks, owned a dry goods business and 200 acres of cotton land. The family had owned 11 enslaved people in 1860. Marion Cross referenced the 1870 agricultural census. The Hendricks farm was still operating, but now listed 4 sharecroppers, all black men, none named Samuel. She scanned the names anyway, looking for patterns. One of the men was listed as Samuel Freeman, age 21, which would make him about 16 or 17 in 1867. She marked it as a possible match, but the surname bothered her. Freeman. That was a name people took after emancipation, a declaration of new status. If this was the Samuel in the photo, he had claimed a last name by 1870, but the person who labeled the photograph had not. Felt the need to use it. She called a colleague, Dr. Roy Atkins, who taught Southern legal history at Tuskegee and specialized in the immediate post-war years. She sent him a scan of the photo and waited while he looked at it. His response came back in less than an hour. "That rope is wrong," he wrote. "I mean, the placement is wrong. It's too visible. And that knot, can you get me a closer shot?" Marion sent him a high-resolution crop of the rope. Roy called her 20 minutes later. His voice was careful, the way it got when he was working through something that made him angry. "Marion, that's a Bolan knot. Do you know what that's used for? It's a restraint knot. Doesn't slip, doesn't tighten, but it holds. Sailors use it, loggers use it, and in 1867 Alabama, sheriffs used it, specifically for prisoners being transported or held in temporary custody. You see them in old convict gang photos from the 1870s onward. But if this is from June 1867, that's early. The convict lease system was just getting started. Officially, anyway." Marion felt something cold settle in her chest. So this rope, it's not just symbolic. It's actual evidence. "Could be," Roy said. "Or it could be staged to look like evidence. Either way, someone wanted it in the picture. You need to find out who these boys were and what happened in June 1867. Because this doesn't look like a keepsake. This looks like documentation." Marion hung up and stared at the photograph again. The boys' faces suddenly looked different. Thomas, the white boy, had his jaw set, his mouth a thin line. Samuel's eyes were darker, deeper, his posture slightly more rigid, as if he was holding himself together by force of will. They were not smiling. They were not relaxed. They looked like they were standing witness. The Alabama Black Belt in 1867 was a landscape of brutal transition. The war had ended 2 years earlier, but the question of what came next was still unresolved in every county courthouse, every plantation commissary, every stretch of cotton field. Slavery was legally dead, but the people who had built their wealth on forced labor were not ready to let go of their economic model. The Freedmen's Bureau was supposed to protect the rights of formerly enslaved people, but it was understaffed and underfunded, and local white officials despised it. Black codes had been passed and then struck down, then rewritten in softer language that still accomplished the same goal: control black labor, limit black movement, criminalize black independence. Vagrancy laws were the favorite tool. If a black man did not have a labor contract, or could not prove employment, or was simply walking down a road at the wrong time, he could be arrested. The charge was vague enough to be useful: loitering, disorderly conduct, refusal to work. The punishment was a fine the person could not pay, which meant the debt was sold to a local employer who would work it off for them. In practice, this meant coal mines, turpentine, camps, railway construction, anywhere the work was dangerous and the death rate was high enough that free labor would not stay. Marion drove down to Selma on a Saturday morning, following the old route that would have connected the Hendricks property to the county seat. The land was still mostly agricultural, though now it was soybeans and timber instead of cotton. She stopped at the Dallas County Courthouse, where the archives held records from the Reconstruction period. The clerk, a woman named Linda who had worked there for 30 years, led her to a storage room in the basement. The files were organized by year and category: land deeds, probate records, criminal cases, Board of Revenue minutes. Marion asked for the criminal dockets from 1867. She spent 3 hours going through the ledger, reading charges and sentences in faded clerk's handwriting. Most of the cases were predictable: petty theft, assault, public drunkenness. But starting in March 1867, there was a spike in vagrancy arrests. Marion counted them. 16 cases between March and July. All the defendants were black men or boys, ages 14 to 40. All were sentenced to fines they could not pay. All were released into the custody of private employers. She copied down the names of the employers. 3 were plantation owners, 2 were railroad contractors, 1 was a man named J.P. Darden, listed as Mining Operations, Bibb County. In the margin next to one entry, dated June 14, 1867, someone had written a note in pencil. Disputed. Case under review. The defendant's name was Samuel Freeman, Negro male, age 16. Charge: vagrancy and refusal to comply with lawful employment. Sentence: 30 days labor or $15 fine. Released to custody of J.P. Darden. Marion copied the entire entry, her hand shaking slightly. Samuel Freeman, age 16, arrested June 14th. The photograph was dated June 1867, no specific day, but if Samuel had been arrested mid-month and the photo was taken around the same time, that meant someone, probably Thomas, had arranged this portrait in the narrow window between arrest and transport. That would explain the urgency, the deliberate placement of the rope, the way both boys looked like they were trying to say something the law would not let them say out loud. She found Linda and asked about the note in the margin. "Do you have any follow-up records? Appeals, reviews, anything like that?" Linda checked the index. "Not in the criminal files, but you might try probate or civil cases. Sometimes families would file complaints if they thought an arrest was improper, or if someone died in custody and there was a dispute about compensation." Marion felt her stomach tighten. "Compensation for what?" "For the labor contract," Linda said, matter of fact. If a leased convict died before the term was up, the employer might owe the county or the family a refund. It was treated like property damage. Marion went back to the files. She found the civil docket for July 1867. There, listed under complaints and petitions, was a filing by Amos Hendricks, white male property owner, on behalf of Samuel Freeman, a minor formerly in service to his household. The complaint alleged that Samuel had been unlawfully detained under false pretenses by Sheriff Marcus Tate, that the charge of vagrancy was fabricated, and that Samuel had been leased to J.P. Darden's mining operation in violation of his rights under the Freedmen's Bureau guidelines. The filing requested Samuel's immediate release and the nullification of the labor contract. Attached to the complaint was a list of supporting evidence. Item 3. Photographic documentation, dated June 1867, showing evidence of restraint prior to transport. Marion sat back in the metal folding chair and stared at the page. This was it. The photograph was not a keepsake or a family portrait. It was a legal exhibit. Thomas Hendricks and his father had used it to prove that Samuel was being held improperly, that he was not a free laborer entering a contract, but a prisoner being shipped off to die in a coal mine. The rope in the picture was the rope used by Sheriff Tate's deputies. The boys had posed with it deliberately, documenting the tools of coercion before Samuel was taken away. She scanned the next pages, looking for the outcome. The case had gone before a circuit judge in late July. The complaint was dismissed. The judge's reasoning, written in a single curt paragraph, stated that the plaintiff had failed to demonstrate that the defendant, Samuel Freeman, was unlawfully detained, and that the sheriff's authority to enforce vagrancy statutes was within his lawful discretion. Furthermore, the court noted that the photographic evidence was inconclusive and that the presence of rope in the image did not constitute proof of wrongdoing. The labor contract was upheld. Samuel Freeman remained in the custody of J.P. Darden. Marion copied everything. She drove back to Montgomery in silence, thinking about what it meant to take a photograph as evidence and have a judge look at it and see nothing wrong. The Bibb County coal mines in the 1860s were death traps. Marion found records through the Alabama Department of Archives and History, reports from mine inspectors, inquest documents, Freedmen's Bureau complaints. The mines were shallow shaft operations, extracting low-grade coal for local ironworks and steamboats. The working conditions were brutal. Explosions from methane gas, roof collapses, flooded tunnels. Workers were not given safety equipment. They were not trained. They were expendable. J.P. Darden's operation was one of the worst. Between 1866 and 1870, at least 18 men died in his mines. Most of them were leased convicts. Most of them were black. The Freedmen's Bureau had tried to investigate in 1868, but Darden refused to cooperate, and the local sheriff, the same Marcus Tate who had arrested Samuel, blocked the Bureau agents from accessing the site. Eventually, the case was dropped. Darden kept his lease contracts. The mines kept running. Marion contacted a researcher at the University of Alabama, Dr. Evelyn Price, who had spent a decade compiling records of convict leasing victims. Evelyn had built a database, cross-referencing court records, death certificates, and cemetery logs. Marion sent her Samuel Freeman's name, the arrest date, and the Darden connection. Evelyn called her 2 days later. Her voice was quiet, careful. "I found him," she said. "Samuel Freeman, age 16, leased to J.P. Darden, June 1867. He's listed in a Bibb County coroner's report from August 1867. Cause of death, accidental crushing injury, mine shaft collapse, buried in an unmarked grave at the Darden mining camp. No family notified." Marion closed her eyes. 2 months. Samuel had lasted 2 months. "There's more," Evelyn said. "I found a Freedmen's Bureau letter from September 1867. It's a complaint filed by someone named Thomas Hendricks, trying to get information about Samuel Freeman's death. The Bureau agent, a man named Captain William Torrance, wrote back saying he had tried to investigate but was denied access by the sheriff. Torrance noted that the young man filing the complaint, Thomas Hendricks, seemed credible and distressed, but that without cooperation from local authorities, there was nothing the Bureau could do. Torrance recommended that Hendricks contact a lawyer, but also warned him that pursuing the case could put him at risk. White men who challenged the convict lease system were not popular with other white men. Marion asked Evelyn to send her everything. The coroner's report, the bureau letters, the database entry. She wanted it all. She wanted to know exactly what Thomas Hendricks had tried to do and how thoroughly he had been shut down. The modern reckoning came slowly, then all at once. Marion wrote up her findings in a 20-page research memo and submitted it to the director of the Alabama Historical Archive, Dr. Gerald Ashford. Ashford was a careful man, cautious about controversy. He read the memo over a weekend and called Marion into his office on Monday morning. The photograph was displayed on his computer screen, enlarged so the rope was clearly visible. "This is a hell of a story," he said. "But you realize what you're accusing here. You're saying a county sheriff ran a kidnapping operation. You're saying a judge helped him do it. You're saying the legal system in Dallas County in 1867 was just a front for slave labor under a new name." "I'm not accusing," Marion said. "I'm documenting. This is what the records say. Samuel Freeman was arrested on a false charge, leased to a coal mine, and died there 2 months later. Thomas Hendricks tried to stop it and failed. The photograph was supposed to be evidence, but the court refused to see it. That's not speculation. That's fact." Ashford leaned back in his chair. "And you want to do what with this? Put it in an exhibition?" "I want to tell the story," Marion said. "I want people to see this photograph and understand what it is. Not 2 boys posing. Not a quaint Reconstruction-era curiosity, but evidence of a crime that was never prosecuted. Evidence that somebody cared enough to document and that the system ignored." Ashford was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You know we're going to get pushback. The Hendricks family is still around. They're donors. They've got their name on buildings in Selma. And you're going to tell the world that their great-great-grandfather tried to save a black boy from being murdered by the state and lost." "Is that a bad story?" Marion asked. "No," Ashford said, "but it's a complicated one. And the people who descend from Sheriff Tate and Judge Morrison and J.P. Darden, they're not going to like it. Neither are the people who benefit from the idea that Reconstruction was just a difficult time when everyone was trying their best." Marion met his eyes. "I'm not here to make people comfortable. I'm here to tell the truth." Ashford sighed. He closed the image on his screen, then opened it again, as if hoping it might look different the second time. "All right," he said. "Let's build a case. But we do this right. We document everything. We get second opinions. We bring in outside historians. And we prepare for the fact that when this goes public, people are going to fight us." The next 3 months were a controlled excavation of the past. Marion brought in Roy Atkins and Evelyn Price as consulting historians. They combed through every record they could find. Hendricks family papers donated to the Selma Public Library, Friedman's Bureau microfilm at the National Archives, convict lease contracts held at the Alabama Department of Corrections, even the personal diary of Captain William Torrance, which had been preserved by his descendants and donated to a small museum in Ohio. The diary was a revelation. Torrance had written extensively about his frustrations with local officials, about young men like Thomas Hendricks who came to him desperate for help, about the convict lease system he called slavery by another name and more vicious for being cloaked in legality. They found more photographs by J. L. Whitmore, including one of Sheriff Tate standing in front of the Dallas County Courthouse, looking proud and prosperous. They found Tate's arrest ledger, which showed a clear pattern. Young black men arrested in cycles that matched labor shortages at local mines and turpentine camps. They found a letter from Thomas Hendricks to a cousin in Georgia, dated November 1867, in which he wrote, "I have failed Samuel, and I will carry that failure all my days. They would not listen, they would not see. I showed them proof, and they called it nothing." In January, the archive convened a review panel. Historians, civil rights scholars, a representative from the Equal Justice Initiative, and 2 descendants of convict leasing victims whose families had been documented in similar cases. Marion presented the photograph in the full chain of evidence. The panel asked hard questions. They wanted to know how she could be certain the rope was a restraint. They wanted to know if there was any chance the photo had been staged for other reasons. They wanted to know if she was imposing a modern interpretation on an ambiguous image. Marion answered every question. She showed them the knot analysis from maritime historians who confirmed it was a standard restraint tie. She showed them the court documents that explicitly referenced the photograph as evidence. She showed them the pattern of arrests and leases that made Samuel's case not an isolated tragedy, but one example of a systematic operation. She showed them Thomas Hendricks's letters, his repeated attempts to get justice, his eventual silence after the case was dismissed, and Samuel was dead. The panel voted unanimously to support the exhibition. Not everyone agreed. The Hendricks Family Heritage Association, a group of descendants who maintained the old family home as a historical site, wrote a letter objecting to the characterization of Amos Hendricks as someone who had employed enslaved people. They argued that the family had treated their workers well, that they had supported Samuel after emancipation, and that the arrest had been a misunderstanding. They did not want the family name associated with a story about convict leasing, even as victims of the system. Marion met with 2 representatives from the association at a coffee shop in Selma. They were polite, uncomfortable, defensive. One of them, a retired schoolteacher named Ellen Hendricks, kept saying, "But Thomas tried to help. He did everything he could. Why does the story have to focus on the fact that Samuel died? Why can't it focus on the fact that Thomas cared?" Marion chose her words carefully. "Because Samuel's death is the point," she said. "Thomas cared, and Thomas tried, and Thomas failed, because the system was designed to make him fail. That's the story. If we only talk about Thomas's good intentions, we erase what the system did to Samuel. We make it about white guilt instead of black death. And that's not honest." Ellen looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "You're right. I don't like it, but you're right." The other representative, a lawyer named Mark Hendricks, was less convinced. "You're going to make people think our family was complicit," he said. "Your family owned enslaved people," Marion said. "That's complicity. But your family also tried to fight convict leasing. That's resistance. Both things are true. The photograph shows both things. That's why it matters." Mark shook his head. "I still don't think this is fair to us." Marion did not argue further. Some people would never be ready to hear it. The exhibition opened in April 2024 at the Alabama Historical Archives Public Gallery. It was called Evidence, Photographs, and the Hidden History of Convict Leasing. The photograph of Thomas and Samuel was the centerpiece, displayed on a large wall panel with the rope detail blown up and annotated. Next to it were the court documents, the bureau letters, the coroner's report, and excerpts from Thomas Hendricks's correspondence. The wall text explained everything: the arrest, the photograph, the failed legal challenge, Samuel's death, Thomas's grief. But the exhibition did not stop there. Marion and her team had included 12 other photographs from the same period, all of them showing similar hidden details. A young black woman standing beside a white family, her hands positioned in a way that suggested she was not free to leave. A group of men in prison stripes holding tools, with a white overseer standing just out of frame, his shadow visible on the ground. A child sitting on a porch with a chain barely visible around his ankle, the kind of chain used to keep companion children tethered to plantation households, even after emancipation. The exhibition also included oral histories. Marion had contacted descendants of Samuel Freeman through genealogical databases and Black family history networks. She found a great-great-niece, a woman named Lorraine Morris, who lived in Birmingham and had never known what happened to Samuel. Lorraine recorded a video for the exhibition, talking about what it meant to finally have answers, to know where he had been buried, to understand why his name had disappeared from family memory. For 150 years, we thought he just vanished, she said. Now we know he was taken. Now we know someone tried to save him. Now we know the system killed him anyway. That's not closure, but it's truth, and truth is something. The exhibition was covered by local news, then regional papers, then national outlets. The photograph went viral on social media. People shared it with captions like, "This is what resistance looked like," and "Two boys tried to fight slavery after slavery and the law said no." There were arguments in the comments, people defending the South, people calling it revisionist history, people saying it was all too painful to look at. But there were also teachers asking for lesson plans, museum curators asking for permission to replicate the exhibit, and researchers reaching out with other photos they had found that might tell similar stories. The Alabama Department of Corrections issued a formal apology for the convict lease system in May 2024, citing the exhibition as part of the historical record that had prompted the review. The apology did not name Samuel Freeman specifically, but it acknowledged that thousands of Black men and boys had been illegally detained, leased to private employers, and worked to death in conditions that were indistinguishable from slavery. It was a small thing, a bureaucratic gesture, but Lorraine Morris said it mattered. "They said his name was Samuel Freeman," she told Marion. "They said he was 16. They said he mattered. That's more than we had before." Marion stood in the gallery on the last day of the exhibition, watching visitors move through the space. Some people spent 5 minutes, some spent an hour. A group of high school students came through on a field trip, and Marion heard one of them say to another, "I thought the photograph was just going to be creepy, but it's actually really sad." Another student corrected her. "It's not sad. It's angry. That's the point." Marion thought about Thomas Hendricks, about the fact that he had spent money he probably didn't have to commission a photograph, that he had posed next to his friend with the rope visible, that he had tried to make people see. And she thought about Samuel Freeman, who had stood there in his Sunday clothes, staring into the camera, knowing that in a few days or a few hours he would be taken to a mine and that he might not come back. He had let the photograph be taken. He had trusted that it might mean something. And for 150 years, no one had looked closely enough to see what he was trying to say. Photographs are not neutral. They are not windows into the past. They are arguments made by people who had power and people who did not, people who wanted to be remembered and people who wanted to be forgotten. Every portrait from the 19th century is a negotiation. What gets included? What gets cropped out? Who stands where? Who is named and who is not? And sometimes, if you look closely enough, you can see the things the photographer and the subjects agreed to show, even when the world around them insisted it should stay hidden. There are thousands of photographs like this one, images in archives and attics and museum basements, waiting for someone to notice the wrong detail. A hand positioned strangely, a shadow that does not match, a rope, a chain, a mark on skin, a look in someone's eyes that does not fit the story the rest of the picture is trying to tell. These details are not accidents. They are testimony. They are the moments when someone decided that if they were going to be documented, they were going to document back, even if it took more than a century for anyone to listen. Marion keeps a copy of the photograph on her office wall now. Not the cropped version that hides the rope, but the full image, with everything visible. Visitors sometimes ask her why she keeps looking at it, why she does not move on to other projects. She tells them that every time she looks at it, she sees something new. She sees two boys who refused to pretend everything was fine. She sees a white boy who learned that caring was not enough, that the system would eat his friend alive no matter how much he protested. She sees a black boy who knew he was going to die and stood for the photograph anyway, because maybe, somehow, someone in the future would understand. And she thinks about how many other people are still standing in pictures we have not looked at closely enough, still waiting for us to see the evidence they left behind, still asking us to do what Thomas Hendricks could not: make the truth matter more than the comfort of looking away.